Hey guys, welcome back to the REI Network podcast with me, Gavin Timms. I have an awesome guest I'm just going to bring on here shortly. Just before I do, if you are interested, a lot of you are reaching out, so I appreciate it. But if you are interested in working with me, I need you to go out and fill out a short application. Go to reinetwork.com/join, reinetwork.com/join. Fill that out. We'll get on the phone. If we're a good fit, we can move forward. And if not, no problem at all. So let me bring him over. Good friend of mine. Here he is, Mr. David Dodge.
Hey,
How are you, bud?
hey, I'm doing good, Gavin. Thanks for having me, man.
Hey, no, I appreciate you, coming on. There's a few things that we want to talk about today, right? I
Absolutely.
always call you, I just refer to you now as the Burr guy, right? And we're going to talk a lot about that. But before we do, I just want to share with everyone, we're actually doing something pretty cool. Me, you, and Don Costa. And we should probably all get on a podcast together, actually, with Coffee with Closers. Every Wednesday at 12 Eastern, 11 Central, 9 Pacific, depending on where you're listening from. Make sure you head over to, well, we can give you two things. Head over to the Facebook group. If you type in, look for a Facebook group, Coffee with Closers Live. Go and get in that Facebook group. Again, me, Dave, and Don go live every single Wednesday. We've been doing it now for about 8, 9, 10 weeks. We also bring on some guests sometimes. And also we have some free giveaways. Dave, what's that link? Do you know?
Coffeewithcloserslive.com.
Oh, there we are. As
Easy.
easy as that.
That's right.
Yeah. So it's been pretty awesome, hasn't it? We've been doing it now 8, 9, 10 weeks. We've had some guests on. We've been getting a lot of traction with it. A lot of people just come on, have a drink of coffee with us and ask questions, right?
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, guys. Come join us.
Yeah, absolutely. So make sure you do that. But anyway, now we've covered that. Let's talk about, Dave's base. Well, tell us, Dave, tell us a little bit about you, kind of your backstory, where you're at, where you're living, what are you doing? And then I'm going to pepper you some questions regarding this Burr.
Yeah, you got it, man. So cut me off at any time. I can talk for hours. So for the most part, Gavin, you had mentioned, I'm like kind of like the Burr guy. That's really what my passion is. It's really what I've been specializing in for the last, I don't know, maybe going on 4 years at this point. So to take a big leap back, guys, I've been investing in real estate since I was 20. I'm 36 years old today. So I've been in the game for 16 years. But the first 10 years, Gavin, that I was investing, I did it the wrong way. And the reason that I say or think that I did it the wrong way was because it was slow. So what did I do for the first 10 years? I got loans and bought rental properties. So, obviously it was still good that I was investing, but it was very slow. So over the 10-year period from the age of 20 to basically the age of 30, I acquired 10 rental properties. Like that's great by all means, not trying to discount that. But now I've bought 10 rental properties in the last 45 days, right? So I look at it like I've done it wrong or did it wrong because a couple reasons. One, I was buying off the MLS. When you're buying off the MLS, you're going through an agent and you're typically paying retail, right? And when you do that, when you pay retail and you go through an agent and you buy off the MLS, it's very difficult to get a deal. And in fact, I didn't even know that there was like deals. Like I didn't even know that they existed for these first 10 years. And the reason that it was so slow, Gavin, was because, if I'm going to go out and buy $150,000 property to rent out, the bank's going to give me 80% loan. But that means that I need to have $30,000 of my own money to put up
just to get in.
Get in. And that's why I was only able to basically buy one a year, give or take, for that first 10 years, because saving $30,000 is difficult.
Yeah,
it's difficult. I mean, unless you're making $300,000 or $400,000 a year, which I wasn't in my 20s. It's difficult to save that kind of money. So skip forward, the last 6 years, give or take, I learned all about, deals and deal finding and motivated sellers, and that people would, trade their property for convenience.
Yeah.
And not necessarily trade it, but they would trade it at a discount
Yeah.
for convenience. And long story short, Gavin, over the last, 6-7 years that I've been full-time in this business, my business has averaged about 100 house purchases a year. And, now we're essentially buying, 8 to 10 houses a month on average. So if you're watching or you're listening, don't do what I did for 10 years. You can bypass that entire process. Learn and know that there are people out there called motivated sellers, and they have different reasons to be motivated. But you can find these people and you can work with them, and you can create win-win scenarios. And those win-win scenarios are helping them solve a problem. And in exchange for you offering them convenience and being there to help them solve problems, they're willing to give you a big discount on the property. So why would that matter, right? Why would somebody want a big discount? And the reason is if you're using a strategy like the BRRRR strategy, which you had mentioned that I love doing, you don't have to put down $30,000 on a $150,000 property if you don't pay $150 for it. If you pay $110 for a $150,000 property and you fix it up a little bit, and then you go to the bank and they give you the same 80% loan, but all of a sudden you didn't pay what it's going to appraise for, you paid $30,000 or $40,000 less. Now what happens is you're able to get positioned into that asset via a refi. And you don't have to have any of your own money invested. Zero.
Because you're gaining the equity, right?
So you're gaining the equity. Absolutely.
So let's break it down then. So let's say, I think one thing that we agree on a lot of things, right?
Oh, sure,
and I think
absolutely.
we do, but we do have different visions. We joke all the time on Coffee with Closers about that, right? Like, you're trying to do 150 houses. I'm like, couldn't think of anything worse. And we have this kind of joke with what you want and what I want and what Don wants and whatever. And I think that's unique because everyone's got their own path, right? But one thing we all are agreeing on is that the art of finding discounted properties, right? Through marketing, having direct access to sellers. And we teach all about that. But let's say then with the BRRRR method, so if someone's listening to this and going, I've heard all about this BRRRR method, so what is it? How does it work? So we're having conversations. We obviously need equity. So are we borrowing private money to take them down to do the refi in 6 months? Like what is this?
Fabulous question. So I'm going to get to that in just a second. So what is the BRRRR method, guys? Let's just start with the basics, like the most basics. The BRRRR method is really just a strategy. All right. It's a strategy to put a couple key things in place to get to an outcome. And that outcome is really to refinance. Okay. So what is the BRRRR method? Of course, it's a strategy, but really BRRRR, B with 4 R's behind it, is really it's an acronym. So not only is it a strategy, but it's an acronym to describe or define the strategy. So the BRRRR, or BRRRR, again, it's B with 4 R's behind it, and it stands for this. B stands for buy. The first R stands for renovate or rehab. And I like to lean more towards renovate, because typically when we're doing these, we're not going in and like gutting stuff out. It's mostly cosmetic type fixes. Now it's going to depend, of course, but mostly cosmetic. So I like to use the word renovate. That's the first R. The second R stands for rent. And that means just rent it out and get the property performing, right? A vacant property doesn't make you any money. You have to get it rented. So this is really a landlord business. This is not really a flipping business. This isn't a wholesaling business. It's a landlording business. So the first R is for renovate. The second R is for rent. The third R is for refinance. And again, that's really where we're trying to get when we're using this strategy. And then the
Yep.
fourth R is just kind of funny, but it just stands for repeat, right? It just stands
Yep.
for, hey, you did it, do it again, right?
Yep.
So really, in theory, it's just 3 R's. It's
Yep.
renovate, it's rent, and it's refinance. Now, you asked, how are you going about buying these? And that is a fabulous question, because really, my partner Mike and I, we like to look at the strategy more as, instead of calling it BRRRR, we like to call it PBRRRR, which sounds so stupid. But the reason is because if you're not pre-qualified to get the refinance, you can get into a bind, right? So really the first thing you should do if you're looking to do the BRRRR method or use the BRRRR method as a strategy, in your business, and basically have that tool in your belt, guys. And anybody can do this. But the first thing you should do is you should go to the bank and you should ask them if you are qualified to buy a property. And if so, what will they give you? Basically figure out if you're even eligible to go do a refi. If you're not, this entire strategy won't work. It'll kind of fall apart. And that's okay. When I first started doing this, guys, the banks basically would say, hey, Dave, we'll give you a refi, but we need to see the property rented for 6 months. And that's called seasoning. So there's gonna be some obstacles or some hurdles if you're brand new.
Okay, so let me just ask you a question on this.
Please.
And I like this pre-birth. I think this is going to be the thumbnel for us. Okay.
There you go.
I like it because people talk about the BRRRR like everyone can do it,
Like everyone can do it.
Which they can, but you're saying, but can you be more prepared? Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to go and buy this thing and then go, oh, I'm just going to refinance, and then you can't get the financing, right? And then
That's
you're in a mess.
exactly right.
So I like this. Right. So when you do the pre-qual, right, of what will they lend on a portfolio, is that for your first time or your first one or two? For anyone listening, is that going against your personal name, or can you still get that on a loan of like the LLC? How does that work?
Man, that's a fabulous question. So it doesn't really matter if you're trying to get a loan in your personal name, which I think you can do like 10 or 15. I don't even know the right laws. You can do some in your personal name, or you can do it in an LLC's name. Now, the kicker here, guys, it doesn't really matter which direction you go. However, you want to avoid working with banks or lenders or getting loans that balloon. That's kind of the trying to think of the right verbiage. That's kind of like the dagger in the heart of the BRRRR investor, right? Because the whole point of the BRRRR method is, well, there's two things. One, it's to get yourself positioned into assets with little to no money. That's the cool part. That's the shiny part, right?
Yeah.
But the back end of this is to get yourself into those particular assets with little to no money, but then get the tenants to pay them off. Okay, that's really the second part of the game. So, whenever I'm able to go use this strategy, Gavin, and I'm able to go out and find myself a rental property that I can buy at a discount, the first thing I do is I go to the bank and say, hey, do you guys have capacity to lend to me? And 9 times out of 10, it's yes, but occasionally it's no. It's, the board of directors is telling us to pull back on this type of loan right now, David, and that's fine. No problem. We're going to go to the next bank, right?
These are local banks. These are local banks.
All local banks. Absolutely.
Small.
All local. Yeah. And we work with about 5 or 6 banks at any given time, because occasionally the banks, even though we have a great reputation, great experience, great relationships, sometimes banks will have a different appetite to lend, and that appetite may not be to lend on what we're wanting to get a loan on.
Yeah.
So we're constantly working with 4 or 5 different banks, keeping those relationships solid. That way, if we go to one bank and they say, hey, can't lend to you right now, no problem. Nothing comes to a screeching halt. We just go to the next bank. Now, you had asked a great question, Gavin. Local banks are the way to go. Reason is we like to get loans that we refer to, and the most people will refer to them as portfolio loans. And if you're not aware of what a portfolio loan is really just a loan that a bank makes to somebody that they don't plan on selling off on the secondary markets, right? It's essentially a loan that they're going to keep in-house, and they're going to keep servicing that loan. And they essentially don't have any desire or intention of selling it off somewhere. So in order to get a loan that's a portfolio loan that's most likely not going to get sold off, you have to go to your local banks. And I'm talking like banks that have, maybe anywhere between, 2 and 3 branches typically on the low side to maybe as many as 15 or 20 on the high side. The sweet spot's really like between 5 and 10, right? So they're essentially local banks, or they're small regional banks. But, for the most part, we avoid Bank of America, US Bank, PNC, Chase, because these are big national, essentially they're global banks. Yeah. And once they underwrite a loan and process it and give it to an individual, they don't even care anymore. And at that point, they're like, hey, can we sell this loan and make $3,000 or $4,000? Let's do it. They have no intention of holding the loan. Yeah. So what we do is we look for the small banks that have the intention of holding those loans. And again, those are called the portfolio loans, right? Now, the cool thing about the portfolio loans is they still have a term, essentially, right? So there's 2 things that you want to be aware of when you're working with a local bank getting a portfolio loan. One is the amortization term. And all of the loans that we get at this point, Gavin, are commercial loans. They're 20-year loans, right? And they have a 20-year amortization table. However,
so what does that word mean? What does that mean?
That's a great question. So amortization is really a fancy word for ratio of the amount of the payment that goes towards paying the loan down, which we refer to as principal, versus the interest that the bank gets to take and keep as their profit, right? And all loans, no matter if it's a commercial loan or a private loan or whatever, use what's called an amortization table. And banks get paid their interest the most in the beginning. So for just a super quick example, let's say that we go get a loan, and it doesn't really matter the term of the loan. Let's say it's a 20-year term, and month 1 we have $1,000 payment. Well, maybe only like $10 or $15 of that $1,000 is going to go to actually paying the loan down. It sounds kind of crazy, but $990 is going to be interest month 1. Yeah, and then
people do not understand this.
Most people don't get this
in their personal houses, because you think it's spread over a 30-year or 20-year term, and it's even, but it isn't.
So it is payment stays 20 or 30-year, but it's not even. That's the key.
It's not even, and it will change accordingly. So that, again, it's heavy, it's front loaded on the interest, and people don't understand.
And there's a reason why they do this, guys. The reason is because the average person that gets a loan holds the loan for 7.5 years. This is a nationwide statistic. So no matter if you have a 10-year term or a 20-year term or a 30-year term, there's even such things as 40-year terms, right? It doesn't really matter what term you have. The average person that goes out and gets a loan will either sell that property or refinance that term or that loan to a new loan on average in 7.5 years. So if you're the bank, let's just switch shoes for a second here, right? If you're the bank and the average loan you give out is going to be paid back in 7.5 years, it doesn't make sense for you to say, okay, 50% of the payment's interest, 50% of the payment's principal. Instead, what you do is you say, 99% of the payment is interest day 1, but when you're going and you're at the last day of the loan, right? So let's say you're doing a 30-year loan that's 360 payments. So payment 1, it's essentially 99% interest. Well, on the flip side, the very last payment, the 360th month, is going to be 99% principal. So it's basically starts very, very top heavy with interest. And as the time goes on, it reduces. And it's basically just like a rectangle. Think of a rectangle with a diagonal line going through it.
Yeah.
It's that simple. And the first part is going to be interest, and the second part is going to be principal. And every time a payment's made, a little bit less interest will be owed, and a little bit more principal will be paid or collected of that part. So that's kind of amortization in a nutshell, guys. But the amortization matters, right? We talked earlier. There's two things that we do with these, using the Burr method in these portfolio loans. Number one is we're able to get into them with little to no money. But number two is that we want our tenants to pay these off. So typically when you're dealing with these portfolio loans, here's the coolest part, Gavin. Even though we typically get a 20-year term on the amortization table, the loan will typically have either a 3-year or a 5-year rate lock. And I'm gonna try not to use the word term when I'm talking about the rate, because it's not really a term. It's more of just a time frame, right? That says, hey, Dave, or hey, Gavin, we're going to give you this 20-year amortized loan, but for the first 3 years of this loan, you're going to have to pay, 4.25%. And you're like, okay, great. So here's the beautiful thing about most of these portfolio loans. At the end of that 3-year time frame that you end up paying, 4.25%, what happens? This is the beautiful thing. The loan doesn't become due. It doesn't balloon. Instead, the bank says, hey, Dave, or hey, Gavin, your 3-year rate lock time frame is coming to an end. Would you like to renew? And you, of course, say, yes, I do want to renew. And they charge you $50 to $100 to do basically a desk review of the property and you. And it doesn't take long, it takes them a day or two. And it's literally $50 to $100. And then they say, okay, cool. We're going to give you another 3 years. Or if you want to buy yourself into 5 years, you're going to pay a little bit more in interest. But then you start basically with a new term for 3 more years. But the beautiful thing is you're not starting all over with that amortization. Now you're on year 3 of 20. So then you go through those 3 years and you do another renewal and you get another rate. But now you're starting on year 6 of 20. And essentially what's happening is you're not resetting that amortization. Because if you reset your amortization every 3 years, you go back to paying essentially 99% interest every time. So in theory, if you get to year 10 of a 20-year loan, in theory, it doesn't work this way exactly, but it's really close. 50% of your payments interest, 50% of your payments principal. So the goal is to use the amortization as your friend. Know it, understand it, and not go out and constantly refinance these loans, because when you refinance a loan, you're essentially starting over. And it's really hard, almost impossible, unless you have 150 years to pay a loan off when you're constantly starting over on that amortization table. And that's really the key, Gavin. Great question.
No, that's really good. No, that's really good. So when you do that, so it doesn't reset, so that makes sense every 3 years. But with obviously how real estate is, how mortgages are, how interest rates can change and fluctuate, is anyone going to worry with all of a sudden you could be, the interest rate could be at 7% now. It could go up massively because it is not a fixed rate for a long time like a personal loan would be, right?
Great question. Right. That's a
so
great
is that a worry for you if you have 50 doors?
It's not. It's not. And here's why. When we go out and we do a Burr method type of deal, all right, there's a couple things that we're doing. So really it's PBRRR, right? Let's talk about that for just a second. It's pre-approved. It's make sure that we can refinance. We don't want to buy something, renovate it, and spend $15,000 or $20,000 fixing it up, and then go out and get it rented and then not be able to refinance. Reason is we're buying these, and you asked this question earlier and I skipped over it. We're buying these with private funds that we're getting from a private lender or a hard money lender. So what does that mean? That means that whenever we go buy a property, we're essentially borrowing money not only to buy it, but to also fix it up. And we're paying anywhere from 10 to 14% on that money. That's expensive.
Yeah.
But the goal is to only borrow that money for 2 or 3 months.
Yeah.
And in some cases, 4 or 6 months, if the bank that we're working with does require seasoning, which basically means that you've got it rented out for a few months before they allow you to refi. So we're borrowing this money at a 10 or a 12 or a 14% rate. And when we do that, we've already got a bank essentially saying, hey, we're going to lend to you. They don't even typically know the property or the address or any of that. It's more of just an email or a call to just say, hey, what's your guys' appetite for lending? I got a couple more rentals in my pipeline. I'd love to have you guys be the lender. And here's the thing. People don't really get this, but it's so simple. But like, a bank doesn't make money when you deposit money into an account. They don't make money. In fact, that is a liability to them because they owe you money. Think of it that way. It's when you deposit money into a bank, it may be an asset on your balance sheet, but it's a liability on their balance sheet. So how does a bank turn deposits into checking accounts and savings accounts into assets? They do so by lending it out. So banks love to lend money. In fact, it's the only way they make money is by lending it. So banks love to lend money, and it's pretty rare that a bank says, hey, we don't have the appetite right now, but it happens. And that's why I say don't just go build a relationship with one bank, because maybe you get to 30 or 40 loans and they say, hey, we don't want to be too leveraged with you. Happens all the time. So that's why it's always a really good idea to have a couple, 2 or 3 at a minimum, that you're working with, because then if one of them says, hey, we've gotten too many loans with you, if your business falls apart, we're really going to have some risk there. You can spread that out over a couple different loans. Great question.
So when, because you said that if you borrow private or you borrow hard to buy these, right? Because obviously you have to buy it with cash, and then you have to do the rehab, then you're going to refinance. Now, as a standard loan for most people listening to this is 6 months, right? Before you can refi, you have to own it for 6 months.
Yeah, and that's called seasoning.
Seasoning. Okay, but because you have done so many or got so many, built relationships with the bank, is there a wiggle room to do it in 3 months?
Oh man, that is the best question yet. And here's why. Guys, this business is a relationship business. When you're dealing with a bank, it is a relationship business. Now, your experience also matters. Let's be honest. If this is your first time, they're going to put seasoning into place to limit and mitigate their own risk. Okay. Now, I've been at this for, 4 years, let's just say, give or take. And in fact, Gavin, we've done over 100 BRRRR Method transactions where we've essentially bought with hard or private money. Whenever we buy, Gavin, we borrow usually an additional 15,000 or maybe even 20,000. So let's say that we find a property that is worth 100 or 110 today. We're going to go pick that up at 80. All right. But we're actually going to borrow 100, right? Because we want to buy it at a discount, which is very important. But then we have to fix it up. So that's a really key part that I think we kind of skipped over is typically when you walk into a bank and you say, hey, Mr. Banker, I want to get a loan or I want to get a refinance. Typically what they're going to do is they're going to say, okay, we're going to give you an 80%. It might not even be 80%. It could be 70, could be 75. But for sake of simple conversation, we're going to just go with 80. But they're going to say, we're going to give you an 80% loan to, based upon how much you're going to, have in the deal. So think about my first 10 years. I wasn't renovating. I wasn't refinancing. I was buying and renting. So I was only doing part of the whole strategy here. Well, in that scenario, and let's say I wanted to go buy a $150,000 property, that was the purchase price. So a bank's going to say, hey, we're going to give you 80%, period. There's no way around that. So if I want that asset, I have to come up with 20%. And in this scenario, that's $30,000. So the beautiful thing about the BRRRR method, I'm buying at a discount now. I wasn't doing that before. So not only am I building in equity and reducing, I like to look at it more like I'm reducing my risk when I buy at a discount from the get-go, but I'm also now adding value by doing that renovation. And this is what's called as, this is what most people don't talk about, Gavin. This is kind of the secret sauce, but it's actually referred to in the banker's eyes as what they call as the entrepreneurial credit. And the entrepreneurial credit basically states that if you buy a property and you fix that property up, and there are minimum thresholds, like most of our banks want to see at least $15,000 to $18,000 in repairs. Can you get away with doing less? Of course, but typically they want to see a substantial amount of rehab done. Now, if you do this substantial amount of rehab, this is the coolest part. Instead of the bank saying, hey, we're going to give you 80% of the purchase price, they instead say, hey, we're going to give you 80% of what it appraises for. And that's where buying at a discount really comes in handy. So let's run through a quick example. Before the BRRRR method, I wanted to buy a $150,000 house, and I paid $150,000 for it essentially. I didn't have all that money. The bank says, hey, we'll give you 80% loan. That's $120,000. I had to come up with 30 grand. There's no way around it. It's just the way it works. Similar scenario. Now, let's say that I find a property with an ARV of 150, but I'm not paying 150. I'm paying, let's say 100 for it, but it needs 20 grand worth of work. So I go to my lender and I borrow 100 and the 20. I borrow 120. I then go to the seller and I say, let's get this done. I'll pay you 100 for it. We're going to solve some problems. It's going to be a win-win. They know they're giving me a discount, but I know that I'm going to help them in return. So I purchase it for 100. I put that 120 in, right? I get it rented. And then now I go to the bank and say, hey, I need to get a refinance on this. It's not a loan anymore. It's a refinance. It's still a loan. That's the wrong verbiage. But it's not me going and applying
a new loan
and filling out applications for a new loan. So that's another thing. The bank also looks at these products as, well, hell, somebody else already risked their money on this deal. We're not starting over at this point. We're just paying off somebody else that already took risk. So for whatever
that's great
reason,
because you own it, don't you? That's why the refi.
You own it.
Loan because you own the property.
Yeah. So the title doesn't transfer on the refi. It's just who's the lender. That's the only thing that changes. But this entrepreneurial credit is the key, because instead of them saying, how much do you have invested, Dave? Which the answer would be 120. Instead of them saying, okay, we're going to give you 80% of that 120. What they do, Gavin, is amazing. They say, let's send an appraiser over. And that appraiser is going to most likely appraise that particular property at 150. Again, this is a scenario. And then they say, Dave, cool, we're going to give you an 80% loan on this 150, not on this 120 that you have in it. So now I'm into it for 120. They're going to give me a loan for 150, but 80% of it, what does that equal? That equals 120. So that 30 grand that I would have usually had to have brought to the table, the bank is going to allow me to use my existing equity, which I was able to build in two ways. One, buying at a discount, very, very, very important. And two, in order for them to even look at the appraisal and not the actual hard costs, you have to put in, that minimum rehab amount, and every bank's going to be a little different. So don't run away saying, oh, I got to put 15 to 18 grand. First, find the bank and figure out what they need from you in terms of rehab to qualify for that entrepreneurial credit. And the entrepreneurial credit isn't like a box that's checked or anything like that. It's really just internal bank talk or verbiage that the bank uses to say, hey, we've mitigated our risk here. These guys have put a new roof on, new HVAC, they painted it, they cleaned it. So in the event that they stop paying us, it's going to be easy for us to get our money back. I mean, just put yourself in the bank's shoes.
And
That's what they're
you could, and I guess on this scenario, let me just check. Yeah, we've got a couple of minutes. I've got another call. But real quick, I guess what you could do as well is you could actually, when you do the refi, if you get it low enough, you actually make money, right? So not only will you break even, sometimes you're making 10 grand up on the front of this if you want.
Yeah. So our goal isn't to walk with money, but it happens sometimes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think the most we've walked with is maybe 10 or 12,000 on a
Yeah.
property. But what we typically do, and the banks really appreciate this too, Gavin, is let's say that we're going to use the BRRRR method, which we do weekly almost. And we have a property that appraises for 160. Similar scenario. Instead of 150, it appraises for 160. And we're all into it for 120. They'll essentially say, well, we'll give you a loan, for, more than 150. And we could essentially walk with money. So what we typically do is just say, no, we only need the money to pay back what we've borrowed. So just reduce our loan amount, which basically reduces the percentage that they're lending. And they love that because they're like, oh my God, we don't want to see you walk with money. The bank's goal isn't for you to make money. The bank's goal is to just move risk around.
Yeah.
Somebody else already took some risk on this. Why wouldn't we? Let's pay off this other lender and let's get all that interest coming to us versus some third party. So what we'll do in that scenario is we'll typically say, hey, we don't need a full 80% loan. We may only need a 78% loan or whatever that may be. Yeah. But in some scenarios, like you said, Gavin, some scenarios, we will actually walk away. Now, when we walk away, you have to think what we're actually doing. We've bought the property at a discount. We've borrowed additional money to fix it up. And the average rehab that we do, even though the minimum threshold's like 15 to 18K, it's typically a little bit over 20. I'd say our average rehab is probably 21 to 22,000. So we make sure that we're over that threshold. So we'll borrow the purchase, we'll borrow the rehab, we'll renovate that property. Yeah. And then we'll get it leased. And then because I have, and I think I skipped over this question earlier, but because I have such good relationships with my bankers, as well as good experience, meaning that I do this all the time, they typically, won't have a big issue lending. And as long as they can see that we put in that, 15 to 18 grand, they give us that entrepreneurial credit. And then they just send out an appraiser. They don't ever ask, how much did I buy it for? They will ask how much we stuck into the rehab because that's very important. Right?
Yeah, make sure
but what we bought it for is all of a sudden kind of irrelevant in the bank size. They just want to see that, again, if I quit paying, are they going to be able to sell this asset and get their money back? Not even make a profit, but also not lose money. Are they going to be able to get their money back? And basically what we're doing, guys, is we're using the 20% equity that we are basically either earning by fixing the property up or by buying at a discount. And we're allowed legally, we're allowed to use that equity as part of the skin in the game or the down payment. Whereas if you don't renovate and rent and go through the process the proper way, the bank's going to say, how much is the purchase price? Here's 80% of that number. Good luck. So you're always, no matter what, going to have skin in the game. But if you follow the BRRRR method and you do it properly, you can acquire assets with little to no money. So in the beginning, we had seasoning, Gavin, 6 months. And it probably took us 6 months to a year to get them to reduce the seasoning from 6 months to 3 months. Yeah. And then it probably took us another year of doing deals and building that relationship with the bank to go from 3 months to 1 to 2 months. Yeah. And now if we send them a lease, they say, when do you want to close? So it's one of these things where the more you do it, the better you're going to get at it.
Like anything.
Like most things in life. But also the more you do it, the more leeway the bank will give you because you've essentially built trust with them. Yeah. So trust in relationships is really massive when it comes to using this strategy.
Well, that's awesome. I appreciate you coming on. And I think we could talk, all day. But I think that what's been good about this episode is we broke it down so people can actually follow an actionable plan here to actually do this, right? And understand they've got to buy private money or hard money. They've got to take it down. They need it for 6 months. They've got to get pre-qualified to be able to get in these loans, follow these steps to go and get your first rental property with no money out of pocket. You just have to get the right pieces in place. So David Dodge, I appreciate you joining. How do people reach out to you or follow you? How do people do that? If they want to reach out, if they want to follow you on social, what's the best way?
Yeah, definitely, Gavin. I appreciate it, man. So Instagram is probably my favorite social media at this point. My handle is my full name. It's David Allen, Alan Dodge. So David Allen Dodge is my handle on my Instagram. And the only other thing, Gavin, is I wrote a book on this. It's literally called The BRRRR Method. And you guys can find that book on Amazon and Audible. So if you're interested in learning more about, some of the fine details or basically how we were able to do 100 of these, we've documented it in our book, my partner Mike and I, and explained it for anybody to be able to take that knowledge and go do this themselves.
Awesome. Cool deal. Well, look, I appreciate it, guys. Thank you for listening. If you're all watching us, make sure you like and subscribe to the show, and we will see you on the next one. Dave, appreciate you. Thanks, bud.
Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.